Hey everyone. I finished session number 2 with Kyle today for mentoring. I started mentoring because I wanted to help people and give advice, and I feel like I can amplify that by putting these on YouTube and by live streaming the sessions. So what you're about to watch is the live stream session. It is unedited. You'll see chat scroll by as we do it, and it's a way for you to give input. You can also do the same through YouTube comments, but if not, I hope something here resonates with you and that you can learn something from it, and I hope you enjoy the video. Thanks for watching. Body levels are good. Okay, cool. Then we'll kick this off. I will start this. Okay, so yeah, you just mentioned that you didn't go to the on-site. So do you want to tell me more about this? By the way, I have not shared with chat what you shared with me over Discord privately. So you can fill in as much as you want to or as little as you want to. But yeah, so what happened? How did things go? How are you feeling about it?
Sure. So I guess like some history is last year, my company does a yearly on-site, just for a week. Everybody flies out to Palo Alto, stays in hotels. They do team bonding, that kind of stuff. Last year, I was gonna go, um, and my wife fell down the stairs right before and was injured, so she couldn't uh, do the childcare stuff that needed to happen, like picking up the baby. She was just too injured for me to go. So wasn't able to make it last time. There's usually like a few people that can't make it because of them being international, visa issues, that kind of stuff. So it's a thing. But this time I was definitely planning on going. Unfortunately, my mom passed away a couple years ago, or a couple months ago, and so she was going to kind of help facilitate some of the childcare stuff because we have two kids now, um, and so we have another infant to kind of like manage nap wise and all that stuff. So she was going to be providing that support this time, and unfortunately, that's not possible. So I wasn't able to make it to this one again, and I had to kind of have like one of the harder conversations I've had with my manager. Like the first time, he's kind of like presented as like a little disappointed in a in something we've talked about and stuff. Um, that I wasn't going to be able to go, and I didn't give him like enough time, uh, or like didn't kind of like. I guess I could have known earlier, but I was kind of like being avoidant in discussing it because I was like hoping something would come up to solve the problem to let me go, but it didn't work out. So I had kind of had to talk about that, and then yeah, it just kind of um, it's happening this week. So today's like a travel day. Friday's a travel day away from it. But there'll be some stuff I can do remotely, but mostly it's gonna be, um, you know, they're doing like an escape room and eating at restaurants and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing this. Like I said, I don't want anyone to ever feel uncomfortable with their sharing. And what you shared is intensely personal and is affecting probably still your daily life to this day because of how recent everything was that happened. So, um, Kyle and I had talked offline chat, and we said that here's some strategies, here's some ideas around this. I think what is really important is recognizing that your personal life sort of always takes precedence in cases like this. And so your manager being disappointed, I know we texted about this, but we haven't talked about it.
Sure.
What's happened since then? Because as I recall, this was about like 3 weeks ago that we kind of discussed some of this.
Yeah, I kind of haven't gotten any more like negative feedback or like interactions about it. Um, I did try to book one day. So I came back and I was like maybe I can go for one day. Um, they decided it wasn't worth the um, because I wasn't going to be even able to get one full day with the flights that were available at that time. So they decided it wasn't worth me coming out for that day of participation. So that was a little disappointing. I did check out. By the time I had come back and said like, okay, maybe I can just pay for the flight myself and do it myself. The flights that were available that would have facilitated that day weren't available anymore. So it just kind of like it didn't work out, unfortunately. But yeah, my manager was kind of I think he was bummed because I know we have kind of like a friendship that's always been remote. So it would have been cool. And I know they're going over. topics like go kind of like establishing the engineering track at the company and having those like discussions that just take too long to do remotely, um, during this time period. So I'm not sure how much of that I'll be able to get.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions about this. I think this is a very unfortunate situation for many reasons, and the professional aspect of it is just the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah.
When it comes to this set of meetings, we talked about what is sort of the biggest what's the biggest reason for you feeling the way you do about this, and part of it was the fear of missing out. And the way you mentioned this just now too, they're going to be talking about the engineering track, and this is something you said had previously not been established, and it's something that greatly influences you and that you wanted to become a staff engineer. However, not being able to take part in that process doesn't mean that that's the end of the process and that you'll have no input ever. So establishing an engineering track, they're meeting for what, a week,
Hmm.
and they're
Yeah.
doing escape
3 days.
rooms, and what was that?
Yeah. Like 3 days of like meetings, basically.
3 days of meetings, yeah. So they're doing escape rooms, they're doing some other morale events. People are just kind of getting together, socializing. It's not like they're spending the bulk of the time just planning this thing. And it's not like this is something you can settle on in a 3 hour meeting, even. I think this takes a decent amount of time. So I think you'll be able to provide input. And I think that you will hopefully, I mean, things go well and you can go to this thing next year. And I know that's your plan, is to go to this next year. So I think as much as possible, we should focus on the things you can still do instead of what had happened. And so I think realizing, like, yeah, there will still be time to give input on these processes. And I would say as much as possible to try to do that, try to get up to date afterward on what did they decide, what is still up in the air. Do you agree
Hmm.
with what they decided? So for example, if they say, look, here's our engineering track, minimum promotion time, we're going to have everyone stay in their level for at least 2 years. And you're like, well, what if someone's a really great developer and needs to be... So yeah, I would say see what they did. Yeah, see if you agree with what they decided. Um, about your manager, you said you haven't heard more negative feedback or interactions. Would you say that things are, quote unquote, normal between the two of you, like how they were, let's say, 4 months ago or 8 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think over time he's become less available, and that's just a factor of the team's bigger, his stretched thinner, and stuff like that. So like the relationship has changed somewhat in terms of like we have less casual conversations, but um, I think that he relies on me a lot, especially for helping, like kind of like leading some of the junior devs and guide those projects that they're working on and stuff like that. So I think things are, uh, overall positive in terms of like the relationship.
Okay. And I know you said that he's sort of been less available. How would you feel in maybe a couple weeks, so after this event is done in Palo Alto, about scheduling a special one-on-one with your manager to just sort of talk about this stuff and figure out, hey, I'm really sorry I couldn't be there. Again, here's what's going on in my life. I'm assuming your manager knows the reasons for
Hmm.
what happened. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I would have loved to be there. I want to touch base with you on what was talked about here that will affect work and how we can, I don't know, make this work for the next few months. So that's an idea. I think that could be good, at least just to make sure you're on the same page, because I think part of what you're feeling too here is it's not just the missing out on the opportunity. It's also, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth here, but am I sensing a little bit of like, has my manager changed how they feel about me or how they think about this? Is there any concern about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think if I separate the side of myself, so like I can separate my brain into like my anxious reactionary feeling and then like my logical response. The reactionary feeling I feel, um, you know, is kind of like always seeking validation. And like if the validation slows down, then things feel different. And maybe like will trigger some kind of like question about that. But logically, I'm still getting kind of like, you know, put into leadership positions and having him running projects and stuff like that. So I don't think that there's a practical aspect of it, and he consistently tells me like he has like no time other than like the one-on-ones that we have scheduled kind of like regularly.
Yeah, I see. Um, okay, yeah. And so this idea about this special one-on-one that I mentioned, first of all, yeah, your manager might say, "Look, I truly don't have time. I don't know when I would do this." But if you were to meet, I think it's sort of for a couple of reasons. One, it can help address some of the validation concern you might have because while you're hearing this, your manager is also doing something new in that they're saying, "Hey, I don't have the time." That is something that you hear from people who are sometimes trying to shrug people off and who sometimes just don't have time. And you can
Yeah.
never really know, right? Which camp they fall into. So there's that part of it. And then there's also the part of like kind of reassuring them that you are serious about this and that you want to be involved with this stuff. Uh, yeah. So, okay, I know you wrote some stuff down here about this too. I'm sort of writing this just coming in from, hey, this was top of mind. Yeah, so why don't we kind of move into some of the other stuff that you talked about? So you did mention a one-on-one about work output.
Yeah, so we had talked about last session that I kind of feel uncomfortable being in a direct comparison with the other IC
Hmm.
folks because my output is usually less now that I'm doing, you know, a huge amount of code reviews, kind of like running projects and working, doing a lot of pairing with junior devs and stuff like that. And I brought it up in a meeting, and on one of my one-on-ones with the manager. He said, kind of like he first was asking me like what's contributing, like what are the factors, and I kind of listed out those things I just mentioned, and he was like, yeah, I mean it makes sense. You're not gonna have as many like hours in the day to do IC work, and um, you know, he kind of mentioned like maybe it's worth evaluating if it's valuable to be doing these like direct point comparisons between engineers like in a retrospective, and especially if it's going to create anxiety, but basically that it's not an issue and he doesn't see that uh, me like he also thinks that I'm probably not breaking estimating, fully some of the stuff that I do, and yeah, so it's kind of like he doesn't know if it's worth it to do the direct comparison. um, I should probably be inflating some of my tasks more than, because it's just like when everybody does their own estimation on tickets, we're not on the same scale yet, and we've kind of like recently been doing this retrospective style where we show like what everybody accomplished. So some people are like way out of range with
Hmm.
the other groups. Like some people are doing like 25, where like the average is more like 12. And so not everybody has it on the same scale. So it's not really like, oh, it doesn't really look bad that it's not in line at this point, where like I might have like 7 or 8
Yeah.
type
Can,
thing.
can you go back a step to your manager said that you may be underestimating, and I kind of filled in some words myself of your own impact, but you might be talking about your sprint tasks. Is your manager talking about sprint tasks, or are they talking about, hey, the leadership stuff you're doing is much more impactful than you might be thinking?
Um, well, kind of, I guess in that instance, I was talking about the sprint tasks.
Yeah, I see.
Um, but basically, that the work that's not being measured in sprint tasks is valuable as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with your manager. And by the way, this is, I think, why I had suggested this last time of talking to them, because if they said something like, yeah, this is a problem, then cool, now you know. And now you know that
Yeah.
I need to work within this world of this being a problem. But your manager said, this is not a problem. You are valued. You are doing good things, and that everything's kind of on track. And so then it comes to, well, now how do you process this and handle it such that you're on board with this? And I think what your manager said about, hey, you're underestimating your sprint tasks, I think that's part of it. But I think at the end of the day, you might still think in your own head, well, okay, I'm multiplying everything by 3 now. So now I'm above the average. I'm at 15 points, but I did that by multiplying by 3. And so
Mhm.
I'm really still at 5 points and I'm not doing enough. And so at some point, it's got to come down to, I'm not comparing myself with these other people. And I think the closest apples to apples comparison you could get is someone in your role. And that doesn't really exist right now, it sounds like. There's another staff engineer, there are managers, but there's no senior engineer who's taking on junior developers, who's guiding their projects, who's specking things out. Or at least I'm guessing there is no one like that, right?
Yeah, there's another senior that's kind of like on my level, but isn't. doing the specking and junior engineering as much.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guessing they're more on the IC side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So then there pretty much is no real comparison point. And I think this comes back to what you said about the reactionary part of your brain wanting the validation. Without the whole like, hey, you're on track every week. Hey, you're on track. Hey, you're doing the things you need. That, yeah, you can start to feel a little bit lost. And as you get higher and higher up into leadership, I think that validation stops coming from the traditional signals. I've mentioned the analogy back to like schooling and how you just get good grades and then you just go to college and you pick your major, sure. But then there are courses, you take the courses, you get out, and then you follow up to about senior. And that's when you start having these branching paths. And so now, if someone ever came up to you and said, hey, you're a great lead, or I really like this task that you helped me on, sure, that'll happen. That might be fewer and farther between than the sort of performance reviews you would have expected. So I think what we need to set as a goal is live in this world of less obvious validation and still feel confident in your impact. And so if you were to analyze from an outside perspective, if someone said, like, you basically wrote, hey, here's what I did for the last 3 months. If you wrote this down and you looked at it yourself without knowing it was you, would you say that's a good developer?
Uh, like the list aside from a comparison against another developer on the
Yeah.
same level.
Yeah. If you just
Yeah.
wrote down like coded this, refactored this, guided 3 junior dev, like whatever your
Yeah.
accomplishments are in a given time, would you say like, yeah, that sounds like a value to the company?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and I wonder if then what we need to kind of do is get insight into that. Do you do any kind of like, I know you said you take on some sprint tasks, and so that is presumably in a system somewhere where you could go back and look and say, I did that many points. But then there are all these other tasks that are impossible to automatically track. Like, I taught this junior developer this thing, or do you have any sort of journaling process you might already do where you could look back and sort of see where those happen?
I keep a brag doc, but that's only for like, when a project is finished or like kind of like more major things, not like minor um like weekly level stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Because I was going to say one way that we could try to do this, and this is just to give you a concrete idea, but I think even just talking about the idea that, hey, we need more visibility into what you're doing well. But one way of doing this would be just a simple journal, sort of like what you see me take on stream, where there are a couple bullet points. And instead of the bullet points, maybe it's just the braggier things for your validation. So not even from a career perspective, but just this junior dev seemed really motivated by the end of that meeting, and like embrace that impact that you had on a more intangible front so that you can feel like I don't need the validation necessarily from my manager or from other team members. Because yeah, I think we need to probably stop the comparison to other people who aren't exactly in your shoes. And even if they are exactly in your shoes, sometimes it can still be harmful. There's
Mhm.
always going to be a spectrum. Like if your company had 400 developers in exactly your position, there's going to be a bell curve. There are going to be people who are ahead of it and behind it, and maybe you're somewhere in the middle, maybe you're toward the top end. And it doesn't necessarily help to compare unless there's something built into the company structure of we fire the bottom 10% of people. That sort of
Right.
forces a comparison. And so as far as I know, that there's nothing like that going on. So yeah, I think we should look at this. I'm gonna put a star next to this as something to kind of focus on for upcoming sessions.
When I do feel secure, I guess it's when I think about job security that I've earned or like the position in the company. Like, if I feel anxious about it, I will think through the difficulty of replacing me usually. Like that's like my strategy.
Yeah. And that makes you feel good though?
It makes me not, yeah, I guess it kind of like quells an anxiety, I guess, of like, you know, providing for my family, like being a target of layoffs or something like that. Like I think maybe the layoffs that I've avoided in the past kind of like had a bigger effect than I initially thought because I kind of like am always thinking about like if a layoff happens, what's my position?
Yeah, yeah. And I know what you said about interviewing being a hedge for things not working out of this company, but it could be things not working out for reasons of layoff or for reasons of acquisition. It could
Hmm.
be anything that happens. So, okay. So we have some strategies here. I want to keep an eye on this. I want to come back to this for next time for sure and kind of see how this progresses because like I said, in my mind, it was find out if your manager thinks anything's wrong. It doesn't sound like they did think that. So now it comes down to, well, now how do we get you on to the point where you feel comfortable and confident in this? So,
Cool.
okay, if you're feeling good about that, we can kind of move
Yeah.
on to the next point you have written. Yeah. I was talking to manager, regular meetings with staff engineer.
Okay, yeah. So we also had discussed trying to kind of like do some stuff to feel like position myself more towards the staff engineering side. And
Yeah.
one of the things you suggested was talking to setting up a regular meeting with staff engineer.
Hmm.
Um, in my one-on-one with my manager, I had discussed with him that possibility
Yeah.
and asked if that would be okay. And he's kind of said like I kind of noticed that he was like protective of his capacity because I think he's like very optimized in terms of task doing.
Yeah.
And he's on a team that's understaffed right now, so I think he's like kind of like filling a lot of gaps. So he was like, "I'm all for that to happen, but I would ask that you have like an actionable thing to work on
Yeah.
that can come out of the meeting, so that it's not just like a regular discussion for the sake of discussion."
Yep. 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 Um, and so how do you feel about that? Let's start with just that.
Um, it makes sense. Like for our scale, like it's kind of like every minute is, potential. There's not like a lot of overhead
Yeah.
that can kind of like allow for, you know, discussions that aren't working towards an end goal, and there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm keeping like a list of topics to work on so that I can have those discussions.
Hmm.
The first one being like unifying you know, some core schemas that we have differences on between the front end and the back end. That I think will be have a good outcome and will be a good chance to kind of like discuss like some design stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think so too. I know I'm the one who suggested this, but I'm gonna ask kind of a weird question given that. What are your goals out of that meeting? Let's say you do talk about this. I know you already said there's the technical goal of unifying your schemas that you have. So like clearly that's something you want to talk about and discuss. But what are your ancillary goals from that meeting?
Um, I would like to think one, I would like exposure to how he thinks through a problem, uh, like a systemic problem. Um, I would also like to like working through a tough problem with him. I don't often get exposure to work with him on projects, and so I think working through tough problems is interesting because when I have in the past,
Hmm.
he has a very solid understanding of the whole stack, but specifically the back end. Like he'll go to you know a few different log systems and kind of like work backwards from that. And so he like approaches from like a totally different angle than I usually do in terms of like reproducing a problem. He knowing about where problems might present elsewhere in the system that I'm even familiar with.
Yeah,
So just kind of like having that exposure to how he works through something is cool.
I see. Okay. So essentially to be able to learn from them and see how they operate, what if what you conclude from this is that, well, I might have approached it this same way if only I'd known all of this about the back end. Does that thought cross your mind?
I mean that would be good, I guess. Like if even to if I learn anything, I think I see it as a benefit. Like
Yeah.
even if it's just like about the stacks, the parts of the stack that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of what I'm thinking about is with every bump in seniority comes an increased something. And usually it is increased scope or increased complexity or increased number of people who report to you. And so if it ends up being scope, and it doesn't have to be, if your company's growing, it sounds like you're going to need specialized people and it's not going to be learn the entire stack. But if your company does end up the growth ceases and yet you're still needed in a staff position, it might be that you would need to learn something like this. But I agree with how you're framing this right now. Anything learned is a benefit, and if all it's doing is saying I need to learn more about that area, that in itself is a benefit and can steer you in the future. So okay, are there any other things that you think might come out of this? So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, let's say this goes great and you're like, hey, yeah, we unify these schemas, the other engineers on board, you learn things. Are there other topics you try to create or things that you try to bring to the staff engineer? How much would you feel you want to learn from this person, given that they're somewhat constrained on their time, versus are there other routes we can explore?
Um, I think it would make most sense to take specific business problems to
Yeah.
this person because of their constraints. And I'm very comfortable doing self-teaching outside of the context of these meetings.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I think that makes sense too. Specific business problems. Yeah, because this is one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about mentoring. I'll suggest things and then you go off and try them, and some will work well, some won't work well, and as long as they don't have catastrophic outcomes for the things that don't work well, it's like, okay, cool, we can regroup and we can plan something different here. So I think this is good. I think approaching them in this is good, and I think there's just obvious business value where you don't need to justify this in any other way. And so you said was going to set one for early February. Is it based on you still need to sort of finalize what you want to talk about some more?
Yeah, there's so the schemas are used a bunch of different places throughout the front end and in the back end, and I kind of want to shore up some of the holes before we kind of like get to a place that's actionable for changes.
Okay. Yeah. All right, I think that's good. And then meeting with this person too, you said you have had an opportunity to work with them in the past, but it's not frequent. So it's not like, hey, I work on this part of the team. Who are you? That sort of. It's going to be like, okay, let's get down to business. Okay, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. He'll see a bug in the logs or something, and he'll be like, "I think there's something happening on the client. Can you help me work through the
yeah.
front end part of it?" That
I
kind of
see.
stuff.
Okay, I think this is good. I also think that February is a good time. I guess nothing can really be scheduled this week, but I was going to say this will give you a chance after this meeting to also, if there's time at the end or at the beginning, oh, hey, how did the trip go? I'm so sorry I couldn't
Mhm.
be there, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, and just sort of try to build as much of the team bonding afterward. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, makes sense.
yeah, I think you're on board. Yeah. So anything else on these couple of topics that we talked about? Talking to your manager, setting up the meeting with the staff engineer.
Um, I think that's it for those topics. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And if anything comes up, of course, just let me know. So then, okay, let's move on to books. So you've bought some.
Yeah. Yeah, I had one, the design patterns one. I had it on my shelf. I think it was suggested and I totally forgot that I had it. I bought Grokking Simplicity, and I also bought Grokking Algorithms because I had seen that recommended before for
Mhm.
interview practice. But this refactoring, improving the design of existing code, I really like the format of it, and it was rewritten for JavaScript, so it's even like it would be nicer if it was rewritten for TypeScript, but yeah, it's been really helpful of like concrete patterns
Mhm.
because you kind of have to. It's changed my thinking because on refactoring because it's not just like make a swath of changes. It's kind of like you have to make changes to make changes to make changes, and like they're all incremental improvements.
Yeah. So are you getting an opportunity to apply this? Actually, that's the end of the question. Are you getting an opportunity to apply this, or is this more theoretical right now?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, probably at least an hour of PR reviews like every day. So sometimes they make suggestions, but a lot of it has been useful in pairing with junior developers that kind of like are very explicit or do things uh, in a kind of like in a where they're maybe they're not repeating or they're repeating code or something like that. So like there's a lot of opportunities to kind of like work through even similar code to like the examples in the book.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is providing part of the reason I ask about this is I feel like anytime you can see, hey, I didn't know something, I sought out a book, the book helped. It's like feedback loop closed. Books are good. Like let's pursue
Yeah.
books sometimes. So, have you ever recommended this book to the junior engineers?
I haven't brought it up yet. I have recommended another one that I think I listed it, that effective TypeScript.
Yeah.
That one is really good. Then kind of helped me get up to speed with TypeScript because it just covers a lot of base like generics and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
um, that I've recommended multiple times.
Okay. And this isn't totally necessary, but have you followed up with them at all? Have you found out that okay, yes, they did take the suggestion and they read it?
I haven't heard anything uh, other than just like presenting it
Yeah,
to
I see.
them.
Because that's something that I think is part of what your role will involve. There's already the leadership in terms of saying, like, okay, here are the things that I already distilled from this book. But then there's another level of convincing them that, yes, you should spend your time this way. And I think, I don't know if you were listening to the Ramey conversation from mentoring, but
Mhm.
yeah, for his company urges that like we want you to do this stuff. We want you to take time reading books. We want you to go on training seminars and improve your skills because we don't have the insights necessarily into what's lacking. So I think it's kind of the same thing here. It's like your company is starting to standardize on processes. And what you mentioned is happening this week is the engineering track, for example. Well, part of that is engineering practices and guidelines. And some of them you have in place. You're doing PRs already. You have some pair programming. You're guiding some of these junior developers. But some of it too might be, hey, what training should you take and when should you take them? And so maybe it's like, well, a year into the company, if you didn't already have TypeScript experience, you learn effective TypeScript and you read this book. So I think maybe that's something you can sort of, gently like push on a little bit like, hey, did you end up checking out that book? Maybe if you end up suggesting something on their PR a second time that would have come from that book, you could say, hey, this chapter is really helpful and scope it down for them or just kind of find out. And these are ideas more than they are like, yes, I definitely think you should try this. So take it with a grain of salt, how it sits well with you. And so you mentioned that you read these books. Have you read them in the last month since our last session?
Effective. I kind of finished off the staff engineer book. I just wanted to put the effective TypeScript one in there as a discussion point.
I see.
But
Okay. And so same thing, staff engineer, leadership beyond the management track. That was the one that you were talking about that you'd gotten most of the value out of already. Okay.
yeah,
So it's this improving the design and existing code is the one that you started through. About how far are you through that book?
um, probably like halfway.
Okay. Probably halfway. Yeah. So the reason I ask about this, I know we talked about the last book that we just mentioned, Staff Engineer Leadership Beyond the Management Track, and you said that was helpful. You've said that this refactoring, improving the design, that's also helpful, and you also said that reading fits into your schedule of being able to do this. So I think I would definitely keep up with that. And these books that you bought, I guess you've already kind of have them lined up. So yeah, I do you do anything as you read? Do you take notes? Do you try to think of like I don't know. Yeah. Do you take notes? Do you think of where it could be applied to your job? Are you just sort of absorbing the knowledge?
Yeah. So with refactoring, I've kind of looked at things that I'm working on at the time for opportunities to kind of like exercise it um, with the effective TypeScript one. It lined up. I was reading it as I was working on a large TypeScript project for the first time, so
Hmm.
it was like perfectly aligned content with what I was working on. But I've gone back as I've needed. Um, like I had to do a really complex generic for something in my job now, and I'll go back and I'll reference some of the lessons in there. So it's become a reference book for me.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's good. I don't see any real issues there. And by the way, props to you for going and getting these books that people suggested because really it's one thing to I think sit there and say like, hey, what feedback or what input do you have for me? And it's another thing to follow up on it. And part of it recognizes there's a pattern that we have in our behavior that led to where we are now, and changing that pattern can be tough. So If this is working, I'd say let's keep that up. This is for the more kind of, I'd say, technical gaps that you might have. And I think we talked about some other things like interviews. I think it'll help with some of that too. I wanted to talk about presentation skills and sort of how we can work on those. And so I've got some things eventually that I want to tie this all back to. But I want to get through your topics first. So I think we did talk about this next one, company onsite happening now, unable to
Yeah.
attend. Yeah. And so how much of this can you participate in? I know you said they're going to be doing things like escape rooms, and so, okay, you can't digitally participate, but are they saying, okay, for the people who couldn't make it, we are allowing you to watch this meeting? Are they taking input from those meetings?
I don't have hard information about that yet. It's supposed to come today or tomorrow in terms of what it's going to be available this week,
Yeah,
but I assume like for the presentational meetings, they'll be streamed on Zoom or whatever. Other than that, I'm not totally sure. I know that we're doing like when Wednesday is like a Teams day. So I think there will be a project that is worked on throughout the day that I probably will be able to participate in remotely. So I don't know where. Yeah, we don't. I don't have like a hard schedule for this week
I
yet.
see. And Wednesday is what you were telling me, I think ahead of time, is like a hackathon kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. And do you happen to know roughly how many people couldn't make it? Because I know you said every year some people can't make it. Because what I was thinking of is you could always sort of splinter off all the other remote people and form your own hackathon project for that. Again,
yeah, we were
just
talking about doing like I want to be integrated into the group that's there if I can.
yeah,
So if it's helpful for me to be in the meetings and doesn't cause too much problem, like we'll try to do that. But we've been talking about doing some like co-working throughout the day just to like have some socialization that we're missing.
yeah.
Um, but I think it's 4 people on the engineering staff of like uh 15 or so.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, and just to be clear, you said you're going to try to be as present as possible. Do you mean with the people who are present there, or you mean to try to group up the remote people?
With the people that are present
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah,
Like I want to, yeah, be able to add value
yeah.
to that.
No, that makes sense. And I think that FaceTime is important too. I think for the hackathon, if they're like, okay, well, we went off and we started our group, and then you were like, well, I wanted to get in on this, then I think that's when you could suggest this backup plan of, okay, let's get the
Yeah.
remote people. Um, Let me see. There's something else I think I wanted to add for this. No, maybe that was it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so yeah, I guess we largely covered this topic. The next one you asked was worth doing Toastmasters for more speaking experience. Um, you said local tech meetup scene is absolutely dead. Do you have a local Toastmasters club?
We do. I just looked it up. They meet on Tuesdays in the middle of the day, so I could like do a lunch break. I think it's just an hour. But I've never done Toastmasters before, and I know you've mentioned before that you did it.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to talk briefly about it.
I think it's great. I think this is one of the things I was talking about. I think the last time we spoke was you mentioned interviewing, and interviewing sort of branches out into a few different things for you. So algorithmic and data structure skills, awesome, great. That's something that interviewing prep is great for. But then the presentation skills, I think we can sort of extract that out in its own thing, and that's where Toastmasters comes in. And so what I think it does is it gives you awareness of what it takes to be a good speaker, and then the opportunities to practice that awareness that you now have. And so you might not get an opportunity enough of speaking in front of people to the point where, let's say, like nerves calm down, or that you're like, okay, I know how to go from just an outline into a perfect speech by the end of this. And Toastmasters isn't going to do that on its own, just like how mentoring isn't going to, like, improve your career on its own. It involves a lot of work on your part too, but I think it's good to have exposure to. And I think that it's also an interesting time to just kind of take yourself out of your own bubble that might exist. So for me, I had been in, when I started at Microsoft, there was a Toastmasters club there that was only for Microsoft people. That was as in the bubble as you could be, because it was
Yeah.
only your coworkers, granted ones you didn't know because of how big the company was. But then when I ended up going to a company after that, it was a bunch of government employees, and very few were in the tech part of the government sector that they were in. And I just never had that experience. I never would have ended up finding or talking to these people otherwise. I don't know what yours is going to look like because it's heavily influenced by the kind of industries that are in your town. But given that you said tech meetups are dead, it probably won't be tech people. So
Yeah.
I suggest giving it a
remotely.
shot. And one of the things, the structure of the meetings, it's generally that there's a conductor of the meeting, and then they have some prepared speeches and then some extemporaneous speeches. And they open up the extemporaneous ones to anybody. And so, well, usually the club might have their own rules, but you could on your very first day get up and speak on one of these topics. And as much as I can, like, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. If you do go to one of these meetings, just have that in the back of your head of as they ask this question, just realize there's no restriction. You can go up. It's like a 1 to 2 minute thing, and just see how you feel, and like just take assessment of how that is. So I think it's a good idea. I think you should give it a shot. Are Tuesdays a problem for you at all?
I mean, I could do a lunch break. So that it looks like they have in person and WebEx as like an option for attending. So I'm not sure how much benefit there is to being in person versus remote, but I could definitely attend uh, remote. I'm could probably make efforts to make in person if it's worth it.
Yeah, I think you can always try remotely. I do think that there's nothing quite like being in front of the people you're talking to. Like right now, I'm making eye contact with a monitor. If I were to like look like this, now I look like I'm making eye contact with you, but it's a camera now. So
Yeah.
it's that weird indirection that I don't think gives you the same approach that you would in real life. And then also too, it's like you can't see my legs. I am stationary in a chair, so there's no like, well, if I were walking around a stage or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I'd say start remotely is totally fine. And then they have, just like how we mentioned engineering tracks, they have their own sort of speaking and presentation track. So I think this will let us separate out the presentation skills from the interview stuff. And again, I've got some more sort of things to add to this, but I'll talk about that later. So yeah, I think this is great. I think it's good that you looked into it. And yeah,
I,
so
I don't think I have a fear of public speaking. Like I'll get nervous before presentations, but I think there are patterns that I'd like to eliminate. I notice myself saying like a lot, and I've heard that like Toastmasters will like count how many times you use your filler word, and that you can
yeah,
kind of work on that as a point, and I think that would be helpful.
yeah, I definitely think it would be. The other thing that is good is really you can at any point just say, I'm going to give a speech about whatever and record yourself and never share it with anybody else. And then watch this and essentially get what you would have gotten out of Toastmasters, but with more work and needing more motivation for yourself. I don't necessarily recommend that, but and that's sort of like what streaming is to some extent. Yeah, sure, there's an audience, but at any point I can go back and watch and say, what's annoying about what I'm doing to myself? Because maybe
Hmm.
other people would also find that annoying. So just another
Yeah,
thought for you.
I did that with the first session.
Yeah. How did you feel when you rewatched
I
it?
was, I couldn't I didn't even I lost count of how many times I said like. So that was one of the things that I triggered me to think about Toastmasters is like there's something that is removable from this that would make me present better and you know when I have a topic when I have to do a demo or something I'll just appear more together if I can eliminate some words like that.
I think so. And as I mentioned, it starts with awareness. So had you not watched that first session, maybe you would have thought, yeah, I think things are fine. I'm not nervous. That's the key metric I have. But then you'll notice other things as you're listening to people talk where you think their organization is not there. So I couldn't follow their points or they mumbled or their whatever else. So I think you have enough awareness about how you want to proceed with this. And I definitely suggest giving it a shot and hopefully, ideally, eventually switching into in-person meetings if you find that you like it. So yeah, this final thing you have here is started side project for backend. Can you tell me about this?
Yeah, so I I haven't done a side project since I started working at this company because I've been working at on uh like I've been working on company work during the times that I've had any time to do side work. So in the evenings after my kids go to sleep, sometimes I'll sit down at the computer and kind of like do some hacking on something, and it just turned into I'm gonna do more work because it gives me more flexibility during the day. But as I'm trying to kind of be better about work life balance, I want to reassert side projects back into my free time. So I'm making started a React Native project, so it's kind of like a tertiary technology because my main work is uh, React Web, and just going to start working on I keep a list of ideas for businesses and stuff like that that I've kind of added to over the years, and the parenting applications that there are many of are very bad in my experience,
Hmm.
especially cross-platform stuff. So I kind of will use myself as a use case in terms of what I need at this point, and I've been working on. I've noticed so many things that have bothered me about the stuff that I've been using
Yeah.
every day for so long.
Yeah. Well, this is, I think, how most businesses start is they say, what is someone else doing that's just not quite right? Maybe it could be making more money. Maybe it's annoying to use and you do it. And at the very least, you learn a lot while you're doing it. And ideally you have fun, but then in the best case scenario, you make a successful business and now you've opened up a bunch of paths for yourself. So I think it's good that you started doing this. I want to make sure, because one of the things we talked about last time is you said your original worries were about, am I doing enough as an IC? Because I'm comparing myself to ICs. And I think we kind of both said, I don't think you should be doing more. And especially you shouldn't be eating into your personal time because something's got to give. And
Mhm.
so you mentioned this is after your kids go to sleep. You'd already kind of been using this time for work before. Do you feel comfortable using this time in that way?
I think I want to. I've been most successful with blocking out time for things, and I
Hmm.
think if I do so with the flexibility of like if something happens and I have to change my schedule, I can. I want to allocate the time to work on this. And in the past, it's allowed me to get better positions. It's kind of like on jobs where I worked in a job where I was kind of like stuck doing Magento all day. And like at night, I would go home and I would work on like React front end projects for learning and stuff. And then I ended up getting a job doing that. And so it's been really useful for my career, and I don't want to let it go.
Yeah.
Um,
So to be clear, I think this is a great idea with the assumption that this isn't hurting something else. So if you
right.
say, yep, there's
Same
flexibility and
time.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then awesome. I think it's great. I think that, you mentioned, what was it, considering streaming a couple times a week in the evening. I think that's another way. I just mentioned this about the Toastmasters topic where just watching yourself again can be really helpful. But also, you've seen enough through this stream and probably others that you get help as a science and technology streamer or a game
Yeah.
dev. And just having people there can motivate you too. And it's another thing to try out. I would caution against maybe, like, I'd say the same thing I said in the video I just did on this, which is list out your goals ahead of time so that it doesn't become, hey, I have 10 viewers. I need 15 now. I need 20. I need 25.
Hmm.
And you're like, wait, was I learning technology in this or was I just trying to grow a streaming empire? So, and by the
Yeah.
way, if that turns into a goal and you mindfully consider that, yes, that's what I want it to be, then that's totally fine. But I think these things can get away from us somehow. So, you mentioned you're working on something now for replacing parenting applications that you don't like or making them better. Is that what you would say your main goal right now? How much is learning versus providing a product that you like? Like, what is the allocation of sort of goal points here?
It's mostly learning. I just kind of like am going in the direction of a product that could exist.
Yeah, I see. Targeting a product that he would use. Yeah, yeah. I think this is good. I think that um, you've mentioned it's worked for you in the past too. So it's like, what you want to work on, you know what you want to do. If you get a product out of this, great. If you don't, you still have the learning from it.
Hmm.
And I'm assuming that since you've started this already, you've probably already learned some things about React Native that you didn't know before.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, just like even getting started, like running Expo and all that stuff. So, um, I also think it will help because I want to have a separate backend, and I
Hmm.
never get to touch the backend in TypeScript projects. So running a graph and stuff like that, like I don't have any exposure to that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think this will do great things. One of the things I've always heard is if you were a designer or an artist, that knowing some bits about how your art or designs are used will really help. And I think that's true. I think really there's no knowledge you can obtain in the technology space that's going to kind of actively hurt you. It helps
Hmm.
somehow, even if you don't know exactly how, even if they're different technologies. And at the very least, you get better at learning and about organizing yourself. So I think this is good. I think the other thing too, you never know if your company's going to start using this technology. And then you could say, well, look, I already know about this. I can help teach people. I can get people on board.
They do.
Yeah,
So the mobile, I'm just not on the team, so
I
I thought
see.
it would be. I picked a similar stack in case I could be helpful in the future.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. And this is another skill I think that as the company grows, usually it's hard to keep the entire tech stack consistent. So an offshoot team over here ends up using whatever, something that no one else is using. And at some point, that becomes a maintenance burden. You either need to build on it or you need to refactor it. And then knowing whatever that technology was can help. So you never know in the future how this is going to go. So I think this is good. Like I said, I keep an eye on a few things. One is it's still meeting your goals. If it's learning, it will probably always be meeting that goal. Two, is it taking up too much of your time? And yeah, that's probably it at first. So, okay, let me see what I had written down here because I think there were some things I've kind of been touching on at first.
Sure.
So let me see. Talking to your manager, you mentioned that. Finding out what your manager expects. Yep. Looking at design books, you did all this stuff. Oh yeah, this one briefly. Looking at the code base from a code design perspective, was there any opportunity to do this, to look at things and just think how could things be better? Or how would I have done this?
So yeah, part of the schema work that I've been doing, I've refactored part of the application and kind of like as 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 I've been doing that, I've been thinking about how a bunch of these pieces should fit together. So the it's my repository or it's my team's repository that
Yep.
I've been looking at mostly. I haven't been looking at the backend repo as much.
Okay, but that's still fine. I think the point was more like, hey, there are these skills I want. And I think the first thing, it's just like with awareness, it's, well, what would I do with the knowledge I have right now? And for some people, it's like if you said, hey, Adam, I want you to go start an ice cream stand, I'd be like, I have no real idea. So I'd probably need to lean on my network a bunch, but I'd like to figure out what I think the idea should be so that I can compare afterward to figure out what I would have done. So still looking at this, I think is good. And you mentioned that you've been helping your junior developers with the same sorts of skills. They may do something the wrong way. So I think at least we've got an eye on this.
Hmm.
Setting up a meeting, you mentioned taking on fewer sprint tasks. So we talked about that you may be underestimating. Are you taking on fewer sprint tasks? Is the concrete thing that you're taking on less? Do you feel like you have to reevaluate or put things back into the stack afterward?
I've been doing more planning before,
Hmm.
so kind of taking like I'll put a 1 point task to build out to like spec out a project, and that's been I think helpful for me getting more accurate estimates because I kind of think out all the pieces that like I'll have to wait for some work on the back end for. You know, I'll look at the mock-ups and kind of like unpack reusable parts and parts that will require kind of like crossover between other components and stuff like that. So I've just been spending more time planning, and I think that's been helpful for kind of getting it results in me taking in less tasks because I'm estimating them better. But that's recent, so it's haven't had a lot of feedback, and it's been kind of like a weird sprint,
But
obviously with the
okay,
on site.
does it feel natural enough for you to do? Like originally, it seemed like it was a little jarring for you to say, I'm taking less than the average
Mm-hmm.
of sprint tasks, or I have to put it back onto the stack of tasks that they have. When you take on this 1 point task of specking something out, do you feel like, what if this is all I do? It's just this 1 point, or does it feel like, yes, this is necessary to avoid the problems that I encountered, and I'm providing more value by doing it? Basically, how does this sit with you?
I think it's very useful because either I'm working on the task or somebody else is, but regardless, they're gonna have strong requirements built out for the work, and people that have been picking up tasks that I have been report like kind of like providing feedback that they enjoy having the more fleshed out tasks with estimates and stuff like that.
Okay, awesome. I want you to think about, hang on one sec. Sorry, this happens toward the end of these mentoring sessions. I want you to think about that entire process. You basically, on your own, instilled this planning task that now that it's there, not only helps your work, But if you're not the person to implement something, help somebody else's work, you've already gotten feedback that it's good. I know it hasn't been a long time, but you yourself have seen that it's helped you. You think that it's useful, and like you did that. So pat yourself on the back for that for sure. And just think about how you can make these changes for kind of anything that you see. If you're like, look, I'm stressed by this, then we tackle that as a problem. We come up with a solution. And so I think you should continue doing this moving forward. We should see for another month or two, is this just something that now this makes sense, this is what you should do? And by the way, because you're working up the seniority chain, is this a systemic issue? Are other junior or sort of medium level devs, are they running into these same problems where they say, look, I took a task, but man, it was actually 28 points and I thought it was going to be 12. So yeah, keep an eye on whether this continues to work. See if this is a systemic problem with other devs. Yeah. But yeah, great job on that. I talked about session 1.5. This I had written down, I think probably shortly after our last session. What is your general anxiety level at now? And that was before I knew some of the things that you shared at the beginning of this session. So let's scope this to work anxiety. What is your general work anxiety level at now?
I think I'm doing better. I'm in a better position than I was at the time of our last discussion. I was
Mhm.
holding that knowledge of that situation in my head before having discussed it, so that was helpful to kind of like peel the band-aid off.
Yeah.
I think having had the discussions with my manager and kind of like getting reassurance that it's expected, and the work that I'm doing for around planning and like internal mentoring and stuff is appreciated. That was helpful. I'm trying to force myself. So like the work-life balance stuff that has gone that we had discussed before. I believe I still feel the anxiety of it, but I'm aware of it now and kind of head that off at the pass when the whole I forget the name of it, but it's like you identify the feeling as it comes in, and because you've had the thought before, you kind of like have decided how you're going to deal with it. So
Hmm.
I've been trying to do that with concerns about work life balance, like just do my best as much as I can, but also like protect time that I have to allocate.
And so this pressure about essentially violating your work-life balance, where do you think it's coming from the most?
Uh, I like I don't work a 9 to 5 solidly. I
Hmm.
have hours broken up where like I'll work for an hour or two, I'll take the kids to school, I'll work for a few hours, and then I'll like sometimes finish up in the evening or something.
Hmm.
And I don't have like a set of time where like I know for sure that I'm like delivering the amount of work that I'm expected to deliver.
Yeah.
And then combine that with the points, presenting as lower, makes me feel like I'm like taking advantage of like I'm doing my absolute best. Like I'm holding more anxiety about it than anybody else is holding for me, but the thought is like, do I appear to be taking advantage of the system?
Yeah. Have, you must have felt at some point in your career that you could point at someone and say, they're taking advantage of the system.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Do you see any similarities between you now and that person you would have pointed at?
No.
No, they're
Yeah.
very different, right? Like
Yeah.
you can tell when someone is slacking or coasting. You can't tell why. Like they might have a catastrophic thing that happened in their life, sure. But you can tell when someone just doesn't care or isn't putting in the time. And I doubt you're coming across that way. And especially not if your manager is saying what your manager is saying, because they'd have signals that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And they would probably tell you those signals given your relationship and given that they just want their team to be successful.
Yeah,
So
true.
I think that's something you should put as far from your head as you can, that, hey, do I look like I'm taking advantage of the system? Because you've had a lot happen in the last few months. If after that time, your manager or anyone else, if no one's actually given you signals that you have reason to believe that they think that you're taking advantage of the system, then then yeah, I don't think that's something you should think about. Only because it's just going to add more pressure and it's just going to feel harmful. And I know it's not as simple as like, well, Adam said I shouldn't think about this, so now I'm not thinking about this. But
Sure.
yeah, you convince your conscious brain first that this is not a productive thought. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, he has no signals that other people feel this way. And then let me see. I think some of this stuff I can save for next time. I want to make sure because I know we started a tiny bit early. Yeah, and I'm not, this always seems a little weird because I'm like I want to stay focused on time, and I don't know what people think in chat, but it's not like we can't spend a little bit longer. But I want to make sure we don't tire ourselves out doing this.
Sure.
So let me see. I think that's probably a pretty good stopping point, and I can bump this stuff for next time. Put another star here, bump this stuff for next time. So I want to do the same sort of cool down question of, yeah, how do you feel about all of this? Are you still feeling positively? Do you want to, third session on the horizon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. My wife made a comment that she's been kind of pushing me to kind of take take more, I guess, man, how do I say it? To kind of give myself some slack with the work-life balance stuff. And she made a comment that was like, hopefully this external person, like it seems like you're actually doing something because somebody external to me is is saying it. So I think it's useful to have like a dedicated time to think about and work on stuff because I've already like been implementing kind of I've been trying to implement changes to my thought patterns, and it's not an easy process. And the thoughts are still there, but like it's the reaction, like once you notice the thoughts. So I think it's been helpful already.
Well, good. And I think you're doing a great job. I wrote this in the contract somewhere for mentoring, but I said, I don't just tell you stuff and then your life gets better. It's I tell you stuff, you process it in your own way. You come back, you tell me the inputs that I can guide you again in the future. So
Mhm.
I think you're doing great. I think it's good that you're thinking about this stuff. I think it's good that you think that this is kind of trending positively because, like I said, that's all that really matters to me. And yeah, and we'll book another session. So I want to thank you very much, and again for being vulnerable on stream and sharing everything about your career and your life. So yeah, I hope you have a
Absolutely.
good rest of
Thank you
your
for
day,
the
Kyle.
time.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you too. All right,
Good to
take
see you.
care.
See ya.
Bye. All right, this time I am not going to leak a bunch of private conversations, but just in case, let me click this button and then this button. All right, so claps for Beardage. Where is chat? Here we go. I don't know if you can even hear clap sounds or if it gets like filtered out or something.